You know, one of my overriding passions, if I may say, in life have been books. I've been reading books since, I don't know, since the age of 8, 9. And because of impaired eyesight, which I'm supposed to have sort of inherited from my mother, I've been wearing glasses since the age of 5. Which it turns out was a real blessing because I couldn't participate in outdoor sports because of, things like football played in the monsoon, hockey. Obviously, we could not play with glasses on. So it sort of channelized me into reading. And I love reading to such an extent that even today when my eyesight, I'm now in my 80th year, my eyesight is considerably impaired, glasses are not improving the situation. Yet I managed to read probably 1 or 2% of what I used to do 10 years ago. I used to be able to read, on an average, 3 to 4 books a week. And during my father's lifetime, before I got a job, I used to buy cheap books, paperbacks, basically the Upanishads, one by one. And so by 1964, I had a considerable library of my own. Quite special books in the sense that they included books on Vedas, Upanishads, Gita, mysticism, things like that. Why I mentioned this is because it was through books that I was introduced to Sahaj Marg. My father had a friend, Mr. Veera Raghavan, who was a chemist. He was one of those people who had an associateship of the Royal Institute of Chemistry, England. And he was in the forensic department of the Madras government. None of us knew that he was a preceptor in Sahaj Marg system. But he used to come to my house because being also a homeopath, he and my father used to discuss a lot of things. And one day he saw me in the library and said, since you are interested so much in reading all these things which are very special topics, why don't you do something about it? I have mentioned this in my book about Babuji Maharaj, my master, which was written in 1974, which is a story by itself. We'll come to that later. So when he gave me this invitation, I said, well, I have been doing some things on my own, but I have no guidance, so I have stopped. Then he said, some of us, we sit and meditate and we have an acharya. We request you to come. My father joined up with the mission the next week, which happened to be Basant Panchami Day of 1972, February 1972. But I had to go to Bombay on my company work, and my induction was delayed by a week. So it was through books, that I came to Sahaj Marg, through the way of knowledge. And it's interesting, that in one of the messages in Whispers, Babuji says, my son is not something like that. I can't quote exactly. He's not a mystic. He's a karma yogi. See. He has to do, feel, experience. And in that sense, therefore, he's a very practical man. And of course, he goes on to say other things which are relevant, but you will read them in Whispers. Now, how did this book, My Master, come to be written? I was in Madurai. I think it was the year 1974, because Babuji's health was declining. He was in his 75th year. He was frail, as we all know. He weighed about 40 kilograms when he was well. and you could lift him up like a baby. And naturally, you know, I had received so much from him during the period 64 to 74. This thing about Guru Dakshina, what we in India as disciples traditionally offer to the Guru, was working on my mind. And during the meditation in Madurai, the thought came to me that the most fitting Guru Dakshina would be to write about him, because till then nobody had written about Babuji Maharaj as a biography, you know. People had praised him extravagantly in some articles. They boasted about their own discipleship, things like that, but there was no cogent, coherent biography of Babuji Maharaj. So I thought it would be the most fitting. And I seem to hear Babuji saying, it is an excellent idea. 3 days later, I was in one of those hill places with a coffee estate, some 40 miles out of Coimbatore. And we were in a bungalow, which was normally the manager's bungalow, but he appeared to have gone on a holiday to Kerala. So we had exclusive occupation. We were about 3 or 4 people. And this decision to write came back to me. So I sent one of my people out to buy some paper, and he came back with ruled 40-page notebooks, cheap paper, flimsy cover, but something on which I could write. And then I sat down and wrote what I thought was going to be the first chapter, which eventually became the second chapter. 3 days later in Coimbatore, I wrote the second chapter, which became the first chapter. So the book got written in about, I think, 2 months. Of course, I didn't know it was going to be published, or you know, Babuji would think so highly of it. I had developed the practice of sending him each chapter as I finished it. And he praised extravagantly the chapter on love. He said it is marvelously written. I'm quoting. Though I don't know what he wrote about love, you see. I wrote about him, which incidentally conveys the idea that he was love, you see, because writing about love, I wrote about him. And he said it is marvelously written, so whatever it was. He used to write back to me after reading every chapter. I know he read every chapter because he told me, and others told me also, that he had it read out to him and kept commenting. And he never commented except about chapter on love. And that one sentence was, it is marvelously written. In another letter, he asked me to expunge one sentence. He had been talking about transmission and the power of transmission, the effects of transmission, its miraculous ability to transform a disciple into the Guru himself. And in that context, he had told me that there was a certain system of meditation where if the Guru and disciple sat together and the disciple happened to have been appropriately developed to a level necessary for the purpose, in one sitting, he became physically and in every other way a replica of the Guru. But, added the master, he was dead. I had written this in the book. He said, please remove this sentence as it will make people afraid and it will not attract more abhyasis. Nobody wants to die, in Sahaj Marg. So that one sentence was all that was changed. What I wrote was never edited either by me or anybody else. It is as I wrote, word for word, comma for comma, full stop for full stop. Eventually, it went into publication, and Babuji, of course, praised it extravagantly. He told my father it would be the best book of the mission. My father asked him, why, before it was published, Babuji, why don't you write a preface or an introduction? Babuji answered him, Rajagopalachari, the book is about me, so it would not be appropriate for me to write a preface. Then my father said, shall I write a preface? He said, no, that is not permitted at all because he is your son. And as the father, you cannot praise your own son. So then my father asked, what shall we do about it? He said, this book needs no introduction. It speaks for itself. That is his language, It speaks for itself. Another person who praised it extravagantly was Justice M.L. Chaturvedi of the Allahabad High Court. He wrote to me when he read the book, I cherish this book and it shall be on my bedside table for me to read every day of my life. You are the first man in Sahaj Marg who I see is the true bird flying on both wings, the material and the spiritual, because you have achieved a high status in your material life and you have achieved perhaps even a higher state in your spiritual life. I bless you with more and more progress. So that was how the book was received, and needless to say, it sold well. And it was my everlasting regret that though many people handled cameras, in those days and tape recorders, the quality was very poor. They used it in flickering light in the evenings when there was no power, with just a hurricane lamp lit. There was the sound of the grass being cut up into busa. Busa is the cattle feed that we produce. And there were all sorts of other noises, creaking of carts going in the lane just outside Babuji's house, dog barking, every sort of noise. By day, it was the millions of parrots, the millions of sparrows that used to flood his garden and go on all day. You can probably hear it in some of our older recordings of Babuji's voice. Had there been adequate technical material or equipment available in those days, we could have made a really, what I think, a stunning movie of Babuji Maharaj, his daily life, things like that, But that possibility was lost. So we are left to books to find out what he was, how he was, what he lived like, what was his daily schedule, things like that. So in that way, this book by Master appealed to most people, and especially because I was very close to him and very intimate with him. We were more like father and son than guru and disciple. And I used to ask lots of questions, and he answered. When I went to Shahjahanpur, I used to sleep with just near him on a charpai in his own bedroom, that sort of thing, you see. So people got into the habit of always asking me to tell us something about Babuji Maharaj. So this book sort of filled up the gap, you see, there also. Because it's difficult to go on telling stories about Babuji, because there were many intimate, shall we say, snippets of dialogues which I couldn't possibly write about nor speak about. For instance, I can tell you that before I was made his successor in 1974, he had been preparing one person, but for some reason, he dropped the idea. He had considered 2 or 3 other people, but found in them, I don't know what, maybe character traits or defects, which made them, in his opinion, unsuitable for this post. So these secrets I could not mention in that book, see, because at that time, it would have been, of course, letting the cat out of the bag, which was forbidden. Babuji used to say of our talks, he would say this is private talk, which meant it was confidential, or he would say this is Khandani talk or family talk, which means it was absolutely forbidden to mention it even to anybody else, even your family. So most of it was, talk like that. Otherwise, this my master would have been about 10 times its size if I had been permitted to record everything that I had heard from him in the intimacy of our late nights in Shahjahanpur. Because he used to sleep very late. 11 o'clock was early for him. And when we went to bed, it was often around midnight. And we used to sleep on two charpoys side by side. I could touch him if I just put out my hand. And the additional thing which kept us wide awake, till late hours were these small field mice which abounded that house. They were running all over us all the time. And Babuji said, "Are they troubling you?" I said, "No, because you are here, When I think of you, I don't notice the mice, I don't feel them." So it went on sometimes till 4 o'clock, even 5 o'clock. So this book by Master is what I knew of him, I saw of him, I experienced with him, both by means of verbal communication, by observing him, and in my meditation. So in that sense, it is a limited exposition of the Master, because of course nobody can give a complete exposition of a living Master. We probably see, they say in an iceberg you see 1/8 which is exposed. In a Master, I think you can't say you even see 1/100th of 1%. But if this is to be 1/100th of 1%, what should it have been had it been a complete knowledge of him, his work, his purpose on earth? Because most people, very loosely and rather hypocritically say, he's a master, his work, and they stop because they cannot continue. It is an intransitive verb or a transitive verb, whatever it is. Or they say, he must be God, God on earth. How can we mere mortals know anything about him? Assumption of humility, which is again false. In Sahaj Marg, we don't, at least my Master Babuji Maharaj never thought much of humility. He said humility is being natural. Both arrogance and humility as it is practiced in Hindu society are both hypocritical. Arrogance means assuming to yourself things which are not, which you have not, which you may never be. Humility is trying to pretend that you are not even what you are, that you are prepared to take the dust from everybody's feet and going out of the gate and reviling him. From reading about St. Paul, who was called Saul of Tarsus before he became converted to Christianity. He was one of the apostles who never saw Christ in his lifetime. And he reviled Christ all his life. But it seems one day when he was crossing the desert, he heard a voice, "Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me like this?" And at that moment, he was converted. And he became one of the most important, disciples. Not disciples, what do you call it? Apostles of Christ. Master unseen. Why I say this? We who are now here from the time of Babuji Maharaj, we have had so much exposure to a living Master. We have rubbed shoulders with him, we have been near him, we have eaten with him, we have heard him speak. I was surprised always when my Western brothers and sisters loved his hookah more than him. You can hear this praise in some of the old recordings of Babuji with his Vaishnava Abhyasi's disciples. And he humorously says of his hookah, it speaks to me. What does it say? Well, that is in a different language, I am telling you. You know what it is called? Hookah. Yes, Babuji, what is it called? I am telling you, it is called Habil Babil. Like that you used to speak about the hookah, make them laugh. I used to ask Babuji, why do you just make them laugh and, you don't tell them something which they should hear instead of telling them what they love to hear. He said, you see, this is the danger with loving. You don't know what you are loving, why you are loving, And should you love it at all? So he said love is a very dangerous thing, see, because at the highest level, it is God. And without that love, you can